Hi, everybody, and thanks for sticking with us. I am not Steve Clemens, but hope to lead you to a safe landing at the end of our 2 days. We have a big, broad title for our final panel here. What's the point of college? And in a moment, I want to ask that question from the point of view of students. But I'd like to start by asking it from the point of view of society overall. Historically, we think of higher education as the great leveler in American life, the escalator of upward mobility, the opportunity for any student to go, any young person to go as far as their talent would take them. But there are a lot of trends that suggest that it may not be functioning that way at this point in our history. So I want to start by asking all of you, maybe Richard, I will call on you first. At this point, does higher education do more to level opportunity, to expand opportunity, or to reinforce privilege in American society?
I think there's no doubt that these days higher education is primarily reinforcing privilege. We just had the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education yesterday, 62nd anniversary, and we saw that our K through 12 schools are more segregated now than in quite a while. And we're seeing the same exact phenomenon happen in higher education, where at community colleges, which have the fewest resources, we see concentrations of low-income and minority students, whereas at the most selective colleges, the latest data actually suggests that rich kids, those from the top quarter of the population socioeconomically, outnumber poor kids or students by 24-1. And those are the institutions that have the most resources and provide the highest graduation rates and all the rest. So I think it's, despite some good efforts by some individual colleges, right now, higher education is doing much more to solidify existing inequalities than it is to upending them.
President McGuire?
I'm not sure I totally agree with that, and I speak as the president of an institution that once might have been considered elite, historic Catholic Women's College, but today our student body is 95% African American and Hispanic, 85% Pell grantees. My students want exactly what I wanted when I went to Trinity, which is to get ahead. The idea that privilege is only for the upper class is not true. In fact, students who are economically disadvantaged want to be privileged too, and we should not lose the idea that climbing that ladder is important. The second piece, all of these conversations about higher ed drive me crazy about this. 75% of undergraduates in higher education today have non-traditional characteristics. In fact, the idea of a student living in a residence hall with mommy and daddy paying the bill, that's fewer than 20% of all students. So in fact, higher education in a different way is levelizing and is expanding opportunity, but it gets very little press attention.
President Duke.
And I think the other thing, too, from a community college perspective, the average age of our students is about 28. Even in Prince George's County, which has certainly been named one of the most affluent communities for African Americans in terms of income. What we know, however, is that, quite frankly, 61% of our students are on Pell Grants. You add state aid to that, that probably takes it up to another 70 or 75%. But interestingly enough, 75% of our students are part-time. They're working, they're taking care of families, they're looking at ways that they can improve their communities, and that's where they see college as beneficial, where they can give back and be really, not just have a part of the American dream, but quite frankly, be helpful in shaping what that dream looks like today.
Jeffrey, let me ask you, let me throw in one point before you respond, because I know you've written about these issues for many years. As we mentioned earlier today, we have reached the point where the share of white, black, and Hispanic kids who graduate from high school and go directly on to college has essentially converged. The African American, the non-white share of the entering freshman class, first-year class, has significantly increased from the 1990s. But as the Pell Institute just reported in a long-term study that came out just a couple days ago, if you look at the high school class of 2004 and say how many of them had a BA within 10 years, for kids whose parents were in the top quarter of the income bracket, 60% of those class of 2004 had a BA within 10 years. In the third quartile, 37, second, 22, the lowest, 15. So we seem to be doing a better job of getting people in the door.
Access, yes. Access is great.
But out the door, still a problem.
Much bigger problem. And to me, the point of college is a credential, right? Most employers don't say in a job ad, we want some college, right? We want some college credits. They want some sort of credential. And what worries me is that the largest segment of students now are people in the U.S. who have some college credit and no degree, or people in their 20s, or millennials, which we also know is a very large demographic group. And so if we don't turn that around, we risk as a country being a lot less educated, because we'll have a lot of people out there with some college credit but no degree, and many of those people also have debt.
Yeah. So when you think about the barriers at this point, President, think about the community college students in particular. When you think about the barriers, what are the biggest hurdles to getting more of these lower income, first generation, non-traditional students, not only in the door, but out the door with some kind of credential?
Well, I think the first thing is having students understand that they can do it. Most of the time with low-income students, when they don't have a role model in their immediate family that has had access to college and graduated from college, then there's this notion that, can I really do this? So that's where I think we have an obligation and a responsibility to be much more in the community as higher education, letting people see that many of us are role models. I'm the second oldest of 9 children. My father worked 3 jobs. I would probably be one of those persons that people would think would never have completed college, or today be a college president, because I mirror the characteristics of many of the students that we serve.
You know, that role model question, that expectation question, Richard, a figure that you and I have talked about over the years, which I believe is still accurate, is that today, if your parents were graduated from college, you are 5 times more likely to obtain a degree yourself than if your parents were not. Unwrap that a little bit. What are the factors that cause that kind of disparity?
Yeah. Well, part of it has to do with this issue of resegregation within higher education. Charlene mentioned, at community colleges, there may not be many peers who automatically expect, of course I'm going to transfer to a 4-year college and get my 4-year degree. On top of that, community colleges receive far fewer resources than 4-year institutions, including some private 4-year institutions. There was this amazing study which found that at Princeton, the per pupil public subsidy, when you consider all the tax breaks that Princeton gets, was $105,000 per pupil. Now, that's not what you're getting at Prince George's Community College per pupil, right, from the public trust. Now, Princeton's an outlier, it's an extreme example, but the point here is that the most resources are flowing to the students who have the greatest advantages already.
This was the research by Nexus Research, was the group, and what they calculated was the value of the tax breaks for the endowments at the richest private school in the state, and comparing it to the public support for the flagship public university in the state, and they found in a number of states, I mean Massachusetts as well, with Harvard and some others, that there were more dollars, in effect, public dollars going to subsidize the private school than were going directly into the public school.
That's right.
Right? So, yeah.
But I'd like to turn this around a little bit and say that a lot of these studies don't really translate into the actual lived experience of students. And we cannot rule out the condition of students and the families they come from and their other life pressures. And in fact, one of the greatest inhibitions to student completion on a traditional timetable, and we can talk about what is the right timetable, and it may not be the traditional timetable, we specialize in women's education at Trinity, and childbearing and raising children, especially if you're a single mom, has a huge impact on your timetable to completion. Being homeless, and many students are homeless, or couch surfing, being hungry, working at McDonald's all night and going to school all day. I mean, I can point to 10 issues that we study all the time, and we give as much support as we can, but life circumstances do play through in ways that it doesn't play through.
Well, you have
for
transformed
more
the character
students.
of your institution.
Yes.
And it is a much more diverse, 70% now, or Pell Grant, roughly?
85% Pell Grant,
85%.
yes.
So talk a little bit about how has the institution had to adapt to this different student body?
Absolutely, and it starts fundamentally with how we teach has changed and how the faculty teach. Students coming in from, unfortunately, many of our local schools need a lot more preparatory work in the first year, so we reformed and transformed first year. But then we discovered that wasn't enough. Many students who come from households where maybe the parents didn't even finish high school don't know the vocabulary of going to college. And college counseling in schools is not good enough. A lot of students come to Trinity wanting to be nurses, for example, and they don't realize they have to know math and science. And so there are stumbling blocks along the way. We have not only transformed first year, because first year is the marker of ultimate success, we've also transformed our vocabulary about how you navigate the collegiate bureaucracy, because we're talking about syllabi and curriculum and the registrar, and kids are like, what? You know, so you have to sort of change your whole dynamic and make it student-centered, meet the student where she's at, and bring her along.
Today, for students, you've looked at students in some depth, and you've identified different kinds of categories, basically, of students. What is the point of college from the point of view of most students? Is it simply a career credential at this point? Is that why most people?
Well, increasingly it is. I mean, even if you look at the studies that UCLA does on college freshmen, about 10 years ago, it switched from getting a broad education to now getting a job. I think largely that's the result of how expensive college is. People want to see the return on investment. But the problem is that many students go to college, they think that degree is going to be golden for them in the job market, and then they get out. And while unemployment is getting better for recent college graduates, underemployment isn't. According to the Federal Reserve, nearly half of today's recent college graduates are underemployed, meaning they're in jobs that don't require a bachelor's degree. So many students go to college not knowing why they want to go there, which is why many drop out and many don't complete. And those who do complete don't necessarily have a vision for what they want to do. And I think that's why Pat's point about timeline, you know, this idea that 3 months after high school graduation, we should shove all of these students right onto college without them really knowing what they want to do and take on a tremendous amount of debt, I don't think is necessarily the best way to think about this. I think we need other types of pathways for students to explore careers, to explore what they want to do. That doesn't mean that they don't need post-secondary education, absolutely critical in this day and age, but do they necessarily need it 3 months after high school graduation when they're not quite sure what they want to do?
Sprinters, wanderers, and stragglers. Those are the three categories.
Right.
Describe what they are and how we might meet the needs of each of them.
Right, so this is a survey I took for my book. About only a third of students sprint right out of college, meaning they move right into graduate school or move right into a job. We think most students should be sprinters, but only a third do. Most of them come from higher income families. And what differentiates them from the wanderers and the stragglers? Those are people who take most of their 20s to get going. Debt is a big one. The more debt you take on in college, the fewer options you have after college to move, to take jobs, to take jobs that get you ahead in life. Internships, so extracurricular, co-curricular, experiential learning experiences, which again, you need money to do in many cases, but those students who got outside the classroom experiences, many employers now are only hiring from their intern pools because they don't necessarily believe the bachelor's degree or the associate's degree is providing students with the soft skills they need to succeed in the workplace. And then the third piece of this is the credential itself. So stragglers, those are people who took most of their 20s to get going. Many of them have a lot of credit, but they have no degree. And in the job market of today, that doesn't get you anywhere.
You know, there's been this argument that, and I guess Bernie Sanders has articulated this himself around his proposal, that the post-secondary degree is now what the high school degree was a generation or two ago, and that therefore it should be just as public schools are cost-free to the student until you get your high school degree, that the post-secondary should be cost-free as well, because that is now the equivalent credential in the job market. Do you think post-secondary education should be cost-free for students at either 2 or 4 years?
Well, I don't think anything is ever totally free. Because there is some notion that people should have skin in the game because I'm more motivated if there's something I have to take out of my own pocket or be responsible for. But I certainly do believe that at the very least there ought to be some movement towards a sort of universal public education in the United States and there probably are some characteristics or requirements that students have to meet to get there.
For 14 years? Extending it beyond 12?
Certainly, at least as the president of a community college,
Yes,
I think
yeah.
14 years ought to be it.
Richard, what do you think?
I think President
Is that analogy
Obama
right?
got this right, that it's no longer enough to have a high school degree. And in the days when we had unions, that was enough, but the union movement has been decimated in this country. And so in order to get that social mobility, people need at least an associate's degree. And I think there's a kind of a hidden benefit to making community college free as opposed to all four-year institutions. And that is that some middle-class families may start to consider community college in a way that they haven't in the past. Now, some people see that as a defect of the president's plan. I see that as a good thing. If you had an economic and racial mix in the community college sector, you would have the political capital for those institutions to get the resources that they really deserve, and they're not getting them right now.
Well, but I don't think we should allow this idea of free college, which I don't agree with, necessarily to displace the conversation about fixing K-12. And that seems to be part of this. I disagree with Bernie Sanders that the college diploma is now the same as the high school diploma. College skills taught are very different. I mean, high school and K-12 should be about knowledge acquisition and the development of the foundational skills. College should be about critical thinking and problem solving and creation of new knowledge. And all of this point of college, we seem to leave out the fact that colleges are engines of innovation and research and creativity, and that's what we try to teach our students, certainly in baccalaureate programs even, and that's lost in the discussion.
And we also have to talk about what we mean by the word college, right? To too many people, it means a four-year college. There are many jobs in this country, including in the next couple of decades, middle skills jobs that don't require a four-year degree. Many students don't even know those exist. Many counselors, talk about high school counselors who push everybody usually down the road of a four-year college. And so we need to start allowing students to explore these options. And that should be done in K through 12, and too often it's done in higher ed. And students get to be seniors in college, they start applying for jobs, and they tell me, I didn't even know all these job titles ever existed, right? Nobody ever told me this, right? And by that time, it's kind of too late to kind of reverse engineer your undergraduate curriculum at that point.
But I also think that there are some advances that are going on today. This whole movement around dual enrollment and students who are in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade being able to start college early. You know, in a couple of days, we're going to be graduating our second class of our Academy for Health Sciences. They started college actually in the 9th grade. In the 9th grade, so that when they graduate in the morning, they'll get their high school diploma. In the evening, they'll get their associate's degrees. And they're transferring to some of the most prestigious colleges and universities across this country.
And do you like that model? I mean, there's P-TECH. There are a number of cities that are trying to basically end the break point between high school and some form of post-secondary, basically make it one continuum where students are just flow through.
Absolutely, because I think that what it does is it provides an incentive and motivation. It shows the opportunities for perseverance. It sends a message to communities and families. We tend to place these broad cloths, these broad swaths against communities about what low-income students or minority students can and cannot do. And there are many examples across this country where we can blow those beliefs out of the water.
Richard, you noted, I think in your first answer, that although, as we've talked about, although the overall diversity of the student body in post-secondary has increased enormously, if you look at the very top schools, there's been very little change over the past 20 years. And there has been, over that time, enormous debate over how to change it. Supreme Court, again, wrestling with affirmative action at the University of Texas and unlikely to resolve it now with the 4-4. But you have looked at these issues over the years. What's that?
They actually will, because Kagan is recused, so it'll probably be a 4-3.
4-3, there you go. So what your view is that there is an alternative path, that focusing more on class than race. Talk about that, why you think that's a better way.
So I think, ironically, that a conservative U.S. Supreme Court decision, in this case, Fisher versus University of Texas, could happen as early as tomorrow, will lead to a liberal public policy result. What do I mean by that? Well, right now what selective universities do is they bring together fairly wealthy kids, they are kids at these selective colleges, students of all colors, which is a big step forward from having an all-white, wealthy student body. But we don't have that genuine economic diversity. But what has happened in states where affirmative action has been banned, so you can't use race at public universities, is that people have become inventive and tried to figure out new paths to diversity. And many of them have focused on giving a leg up to economically disadvantaged students of all races. So it would mean giving advantage to, some of these Donald Trump voters who may be economically disadvantaged and white. It would not mean giving a preference to the president's daughter, and President Obama himself has said he didn't think they deserve any leg up. And so I think it would be considered, I mean, the polling data suggests it would be considered much more fair by the broader public. And if you define economic disadvantage in a way that is sensitive to racial inequality, then you can produce racial diversity as well. You can get both class diversity and racial diversity. But you can't just look at income, because African Americans are much more likely to be low wealth, even if within the same income group, and to live in concentrated poverty. So count those extra obstacles, and you will get socioeconomic diversity and racial diversity alongside it.
You know, President McGuire, you noted that you can't look only at the post-secondary, you have to look at the K-12. We talked yesterday that now, obviously, we've passed this historic moment where a majority of our K-12 students are kids of color. We've passed another milestone that's kind of a less advantageous one, where a majority of our K-12 students now attend schools where most of their classmates qualify as poor or low income, along the lines of what Richard. So when you look at these kind of, you know, the kind of the economic isolation of an increasing share of our future high school graduates and future college students, what are the implications of that for the post-secondary sector? Can they resolve the issues that are created in the first 12 years?
Well, listen, this whole issue of social isolation of elites and of low-income students is an American problem. It's not just a college problem. It's not just a K-12 problem. Everybody talks about elite colleges. Nobody's talking about elite private schools. And the fact is that elitism reinforces itself all along the way, and it's a function of American society. And some of what's driving this election right now with the 1% and the 99% and the sense of anger and disenfranchisement. I think part of the point of college is to be the place, the laboratory for the great American experiment. And I think higher ed should not reinforce all those class levels, but in fact try to break them up. And we're missing that sometimes.
And so, and let's do that as a final thought here, because we've kept these people a long morning. As a kind of a final thought along the podium here, if higher education was to meet that goal of breaking the class distinctions and stratification rather than reinforcing it, what are the most important changes you would like to see that would help higher education be more of a force for upward mobility and social mobility rather than kind of social stratification?
I think we have to continue to be the places and maybe reinforce it even more, where those kinds of community conversations can take place, where you can begin to say, how does higher education work with local government? How do we work better with local schools? How do we work at the state level in order to eradicate some of these issues that we all see and we agree with?
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, higher education has to fight back against the social stratification that we see in the broader society. Because right now, higher education just reflects it. And so what that would mean would be more opportunities for low-income students to go to selective four-year colleges. There's been a lot of rhetoric around that, but if you look at the Pell data, they haven't really moved in the last 15 years at selective colleges. It would also mean attractive programs at community colleges to bring middle-class students into those institutions. As long as we have these separate and unequal institutions, I think we're going to see higher education simply reinforce our existing patterns.
I agree with that, but I have a more provocative idea. I think the elite wealthy institutions should subsidize those of us who are doing the Lord's work. And frankly, there should be less competition among institutions and more collaboration about how we can break down the old model and create
Would you
new
tax
ones.
endowments?
The big ones?
Yeah,
Sure, why
you
not?
would.
And I think, well, what Richard said about elite colleges and the number of low-income students they have, that's not going to change unless the federal government, which has this big stick of financial aid, forces them to do it. I think they're going to have to do it. And finally, I think we need to create more pathways into higher education. Not just this one pathway, go directly onto a four-year college or a two-year college. Need to add national service to that. Need to add other programs that act as a transition into college for students who are not quite ready.
Well, this has been a terrific capstone to a terrific morning. Will you join me in thanking this panel? And we're done.
Thank you.
Here we go.